Hello, I'm Dick Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is on the edge of our seats after days of tense negotiations. Senate Judiciary Committee Republicans and Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, Christine Blasey Ford's attorneys, have reached a tentative agreement on what would be a dramatic, even historic hearing this coming Thursday. Ford's lawyers say she will share her firsthand account of that night back in the early 80s when she says 17-year-old Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her. Kavanaugh categorically denies the allegation. This as the White House is pointing to the new statement from a fourth person said to be at the party, denying any knowledge of the party or the incident. This woman, a friend of the accuser, Professor Ford, echoes the other three attendees, including Kavanaugh, who say they have no knowledge of the incident or even of the party. On Friday, President Trump pivoted away from relative restraint and began attacking Professor Ford, asking why Ford, quote, didn't report at the time, prompting an uproar on social media and a phone call from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell telling the president that his comments were not helpful. And, as if that's not enough, it's also a huge week for President Trump on the world stage. He's heading to New York to chair the UN Security Council meeting on Iran. Let's get straight to Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Madam Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. I want to get to all those important foreign policy questions in a second, but first, I do have to ask. President Trump began attacking Professor Blasey Ford, suggesting that since Ford did not report the assault to law enforcement immediately after it occurred, it probably didn't happen. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, responded to that by saying this.
I was appalled by the president's tweet. We know that allegations of sexual assault are one of the most unreported crimes that exist. So I thought that the president's tweet was completely inappropriate and wrong.
Madam Ambassador, what was your response?
Well, first of all, I'm getting ready for 140 heads of states and delegations at the UN, so I have not been as Kavanaugh focused as some of you may have. What I've said very clearly is every accuser always deserves the right to be heard. But at the same time, I think the accused deserves the right to be heard. I think that's going to happen, which is great. The Senate has a huge responsibility here. They have to make sure it's fair. They have to make sure it's responsible, and they have to take the politics out. And for the good of both families, I think they have to do this swiftly and quickly, and they have to do it with a lot of care. And so with that, we don't know what the truth is 35 years ago, but we'll find out. And I think that's the best thing we can do is just hear from both sides and then take it from there. Let
me remove Kavanaugh from the equation, remove Ford from the equation. Just as a general principle, do you think it's fair for someone to suggest that if a person, a woman or a young girl, didn't go to the police when an alleged attack actually happened, then the attack likely didn't occur? Is that a message that you're comfortable with?
The message I'm comfortable with is that accusers go through a lot of trauma, and some handle it one way and some handle it the other way. Regardless, it's not something that we want to do to blame the accuser or to try and second guess the accuser. I think we don't know the situation she was going through 35 years ago. We don't know the circumstances. I think she's going to get the opportunity to say that. But, you know, what I've said often is she deserves respect. She deserves to be heard. Kavanaugh, who's been accused, deserves to be heard. And I think we'll get all our answers next week.
Let's turn to foreign policy. The Iranian regime is blaming other nations, including the United States, for a terrorist attack on Saturday where gunmen killed at least 29 people at a military parade. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said earlier today, quote, "It is America who supports these little mercenary countries in the region. It is Americans who are provoking them. It is Americans who provide them with their required necessities to perpetrate such crimes. The government is ready to counter any action by the U.S., and the Americans will regret this." Rouhani's going to be in New York this coming week. Are President Trump and Rouhani going to meet? And what does the president plan to say about these allegations?
Well, we will welcome Rouhani like we welcome all other heads of state. But I think that, again, what you're seeing is you've got a lot of rhetoric coming from Rouhani. The United States condemns any terrorist attack anywhere, period. We've always stood by that. I think what Rouhani needs to do is he needs to look at his own home base. He's got the Iranian people are protesting. Every ounce of money that goes into Iran goes to his military. He has oppressed his people for a long time, and he needs to look at his own base to figure out where that's coming from. I think the Iranian people have had enough, and that's where all of this is coming from. But having said that, he can blame us all he wants. The thing he's got to do is look in the mirror.
Well, speaking of looking at one's own home base, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, appeared at an Iranian opposition event in New York last night and said that U.S. sanctions could lead to a successful revolution in Iran. According to Reuters, Giuliani said, quote, "I don't know when we're going to overthrow them, but it's going to happen." What are the Iranians supposed to think when one of the president's closest advisors is out there saying that there's going to be regime change in Iran?
Listen, Rouhani's closest advisors have not said anything kind about the United States. This is what happens. I mean, there is no love for Iran here in the United States, and there's no love for the United States in Iran. And both sides are going to go back and forth. At the end of the day, what we've said is Iran had a terrible deal in the fact that they were getting hundreds of billions of dollars. They were continuing to do ballistic missile testing. They were continuing to support terrorism, and they were continuing to sell arms. Every conflict that we have, we see Iran's fingerprints, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Iraq, whether we're looking at what's happening in Syria. The goal of what we want to try and do is make sure that we defeat ISIS. We will do that. We want to get the Iranian influence out. We're trying to do that. And we want to make sure that we hold Iran to account. They're going to come up with a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, Iran is not a good actor. And they've got a lot of soul searching to do, and the international community needs to hold them to account.
So how seriously should they take it, the Iranians, when they hear the president's close advisor, Rudy Giuliani, saying there's going to be regime change?
Look, the United States is not looking to do a regime change in Iran. We're not looking to do regime change anywhere. What we are looking to do is protect Americans, protect our allies, and make sure that we do everything we can to stop it. And the president has been very strong on Iran. He's been very strong that we can't turn away from them, that they are a bad actor. And you'll continue to see him strong in terms of every action we take from there. Iran's economy has plummeted because the president pulled out of the deal. They're getting desperate, and I think we're seeing the actions of that. President
Trump is preparing to meet tomorrow with South Korean President Moon to discuss North Korea. The president said this week there's been, quote, tremendous progress on North Korea. In July, Secretary of State Pompeo told the Senate that North Korea was still making nuclear material. Now, I know North Korea has halted missile and nuclear tests. They didn't have missiles in their parade. But can you point to any concrete steps that the regime has taken to actually denuclearize?
Well, I think, first of all, it is a major step that they're not testing. That's no small feat. All through 2017, we were constantly seeing ballistic missile tests. The fact that they've stopped that, the fact that the two leaders in Korea both shook hands and said they want to denuclearize and they want peace, that's no small thing. I think the fact that their parade, they didn't show off nuclear weapons for the first time, is a major accomplishment. But look, we are far from reaching the end of this. And I think what we want to focus on is denuclearization with verification. We have to both make sure that North Korea knows what we mean by denuclearization. We've got to make sure we enforce sanctions, because that's what brought them to the table in the first place. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do.
This week, the administration cut the number of refugees that the U.S. would accept in 2019 to 30,000. That's the lowest level in 40 years. Now, I know you've made working with refugees a priority. Did you sign off on this decision to reduce the number to 30,000, and do you support the cut?
We all gave our own opinions on what we thought that number should be, and at the end of the day, there's a National Security Council process that goes through that. This is what I'll tell you is the United States is the most generous to refugees of any country in the world. I mean, like you said, I've been to see the Syrian refugees in Jordan and Turkey. I've been to Ethiopia. I've been to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the United States does all we can to make sure that we're taking care of refugees closest to home, because never did I hear any refugees say we want to go to America. They want to go back home. And so we'll continue to do that. The fact that the cap was reduced on the number that come into the United States is such a small part of the refugee conversation. The refugee conversation is, how do we support these refugees going home? How do we support political solutions so the conflicts go away? And what are we going to continue to do going forward? And I think the United States is going to continue to be the most generous country in the world when it comes to refugees.
Ambassador, let's take Syria, for instance, and what you're talking about here in terms of the priority being to get the refugees back home. In August, the Trump administration cut more than $200 million that it was providing for stabilization assistance to reconstruct and rebuild Syria. How does that help refugees return to their homes in Syria at the same time the United States is cutting the number of refugees that we are admitting here at home?
Jake, we have made it very clear We are not going to pay for reconstruction of Syria as long as there's Iranian influence there. We're not going to pay for reconstruction as long as ISIS has not been defeated, which we're almost there. We're not going to pay for reconstruction to help Russia out when this is their problem. I mean, what we're saying is there's a lot of things that have to happen before reconstruction is even talked about. And it's not just going to be the U.S. Other countries have to weigh in. But right now, you've got a very sensitive situation in Syria. And Russia has to step up. They took responsibility for this. They've got to manage it. They can't sit there and do whatever they want, allowing the Iranians to continue to have influence when they're the biggest sponsor of terrorism, and then turn around and have their hand out and asking us for money in return.
United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, we always enjoy you coming here. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Jake.
One Democratic member of the Senate Judiciary